Okay, you're done with your research. You've gone through all these different archives. You found all the relevant diaries. You found all the relevant letters. You've conducted oral history interviews. You've got all the court records. You've looked through census documents. You're ready to go. You think you've learned everything about the time period of history. You've read every single journal article you found on JSTOR. You've gone through all the local history journals. You've read every single university published book on the subject. You know about your topic more than anybody else in the world, and you want to deliver this information to somebody. You want to tell somebody about your subject. How are you going to do this? Well, you can obviously do this a number of different ways. You can do it in podcast form. You can do it on YouTube. But what we're going to talk about today is how you deliver this in written form. So you've got all this research. You want to tell this story. How are you going to do it? Now, there are obviously a million ways to tell a story. You know, you can start with the conclusion. You can have that weird thing where, you know, you start in media res, I believe is a term, and just hop right into the middle of things. So I don't want to pretend what I'm about to say is the only way to go about telling a history. I'm just going to give a general overview of what I've used in the past, what I believe is a strong format to use. But again, it's not the only format. And I'm actually going to give a couple examples of format. So before we start, one of the most important things you need to do is absolutely make sure that you've read your research and you understand everything you need to know about your topic. I know this sounds ridiculous, but a lot of times people are researching, and what we'll do these days is we'll go through, especially when we're just using digital archives, we'll just go through, we'll find search terms, and we'll look for, let's say we're writing about a person, we've gone through all these digital sources, we find sentences that refer to this person, but we're ignoring what's around it. You know, so, okay, this person did this on this date. I got that information for my story. That's not going to come up with good history. What you need to do is you need to make sure that you're reading around this. You've read as much about the time period as you possibly can. So, as we've talked about before, this means going and getting every book about the general time period that you can read within, obviously within time restrictions. You've gotten every journal article you possibly get about this time period. You know sort of the repercussions of the actions of the event or actions of the person you're writing about, or what's going to happen, what happened before the event that's going to lead up to the event, and you know what the actions of the person are going to end up leading to. You have all that history down, and you actually read it. You don't just read the snippets that are directly related to your guy or your event. You read everything around it. Okay. You got to also make sure you found as much as you possibly can about your subject. You can't leave anything out there, especially, and we're going to talk about this in a second, if you're wanting to publish in a peer-reviewed journal. One of the things a lot of historians like to do, and they're really jerks about this, is they like to play this gotcha game where if you don't cite every possible subject and it doesn't look like that you're familiar with one area of history, they're going to seek that part out and they're going to call you on it. Well, this person didn't reference so-and-so. What about this person? It's proof of their ignorance that they didn't reference this historical journal or this article in this periodical, something like that. So you've absolutely got to make sure that you have looked at this stuff. And as we're going to talk about, you're going to try to cite just about as much as you can just to show those snooty people that you've done your homework. So we've read everything we possibly can. We understand the historical context. We've found as many primary and secondary sources as we possibly can, and we're going to have these available. So what you can do is you can digitize your sources. You can have them, you know, on a second monitor, which is what I do, and I just look at them as I'm writing. This is going to make it easier to cite them when I'm writing. Or if you know you're talking about books or journal articles, something like that, you have the books and journal articles easily accessible location, you know, just back on the bookshelf there or whatever, and pull them out whenever you need to reference them. All right, so we've read absolutely everything we can, and after reading all this, we've got to form a general narrative that we're going to be talking about. and a general thesis. Okay, so if we're writing about a person, we got to have a story of their life. What's the important stuff we're going to add? What's the stuff that we're going to cut out? What is the big lesson to take from this person's life? Why is this person worth reading about? If we're talking about, say, an event, something like that, how did this event start? What happened during the event? What did it lead to? And then why is this important? Why is it a lesson that we need to know? Or, what is it that's going to be worth the reader's time? Okay, so we're getting that in our head as we're prepping to put our research into words. Final thing you need to consider before beginning to write is you need to know who you're writing for, okay, and what the purpose of your document is. All right, so this could be a blog post. Nothing wrong with that. It could be for a fun internet, whatever. It could be for a Reddit thread. It could be for the Smithsonian Mag. We're going to show that. It's a sort of a popular history website. It could be for an encyclopedia. It could be for Wikipedia. You might want to write a Wikipedia article on something that you didn't think the Wikipedia article did a very good job. You might be writing for a historical conference. Like, say, you've got a conference coming up in a couple weeks, and you're doing a presentation, and you're going to be delivering this to an audience. That might be what you're writing for. You might be writing this to submit to a scholarly journal, or if you're in book form, you're going to be submitting it to a publisher. So you've got to determine who your audience is. Is it a general audience? Is it an audience of snooty scholars? Or is this, just be for a family, for somebody in your family? You obviously don't have to have the same standards for one group as another. So keep that in mind. What type of document this is, who I'm writing it for. So getting all that stuff down, once you get all that stuff down, you need to determine how we're going to go about and telling the story. Again, there are a million ways to do this. I don't want you to think these are the only ways to construct a historical story. So, but these are the ones that I generally favor. So the one that I think is the best, and it's another thing to remember, is part of the reason with history, it's not just collecting data. We need to make this data accessible to an audience, and we need to make it understandable to an audience. So you've got to put it in a format that isn't boring, that's something that people can read and understand. If you just throw a bunch of numbers at somebody, that doesn't make sense to anybody. So you've got to tell them, in basically a story form, make it to where it's understandable. So the approach that I think is best, but it's not always possible, is just to tell it as an A, B, C, D narrative. This happened first, this happened second, this happened third. This narrative, no matter what, it's never going to be perfect, because you always have things that relate to past events that don't fit exactly where you want them to fit. You have this time of a person's life, and these are the big important things, but you might have a tiny thing that is kind of important, but it's more important at a different time period. Things like that. When you're talking about U.S. history, boy, it'd be nice if certain solutions just ended the problem at a certain date and then they never reappeared, so you could cut everything up into 12 or 13 year blocks, but it doesn't work like that. But as humans, since you're doing this for a human audience, you got to try and create a narrative as much as possible without losing the meat of the story. So narrative version, this happened first, this happened second, this happened third, and try to weave it into a way that's understandable to a general audience, or whoever your audience is. All right, the way I think is the best way to do this is to provide a narrative hook. So, get the reader interested in your story. So we humans are weird. We like certain things that tease whatever the endorphins in our brains are, something that's going to get us, man, I'm curious to learn more about this. I wonder what happens next. So in the past, for example, I've used started out a book with a example of a battle, or one of my articles I wrote, begins with a guy holding a gun to his head, prepared to commit suicide. That type of stuff is just our animal brains just sort of latch on to, and then you get the reader excited. So sometimes I just begin, even though it's something that'll happen years past when I'm actually starting the book, I'll bring it up just to show, hey, this is worth your time. However you do this, a million different ways to do this. You can do it one paragraph, you can do it course of a couple different pages. You don't want to spend too much time with it if it's in a smaller thing. Like if you only got a 10-page presentation you're doing, you don't want 5 pages to be the narrative hook and then you're telling it the story again the second 5 pages. Obviously that's ridiculous. If it's a 10-page paper or something like that, if you're doing a narrative hook, a paragraph or whatever, get people interested. You don't have to do this again, but I think I think it works. Then I like to tell the reader what they're about to read. Don't trust that the reader is going to be sitting there, I can't wait to hear what this person says. I'm so excited about them. Even the best writers don't have an audience that's going to stick with them a long time, especially these days. You've got to tell them, hey, you're about to read a story that's generally about this person, this event, something like that. Don't give them the details, but just give them enough to, okay, this is what I'm going to be devoting the next, if it's a book, the next 15 hours on. So this is worth reading. If you're doing it in a paper, just summarize things really quickly. What you can also insert a lot of times, and this is debatable how the extent to do this is you're going to be trying to show the reader why the subject's worth studying and who else has talked about this before. So sometimes you're going to be talking about people that people have talked about a lot before. Like there's 500 plus biographies of Abraham Lincoln. So if you're wanting to make a specific argument about Lincoln, and there's plenty still to be made, you need to say why your argument is different than other people's. So this might mean going through and saying, this is who's written about Lincoln before. This is, who's written about this particular aspect of his life. This is why they're different than what I'm doing. Or this is what, they've argued, and I'm sort of going against that. So in the next paragraph or two, tell who's come before you, and then tell how you're different. I think that's good, okay? And wrapped along with that, you're going to be given your thesis statement. So I think Abraham Lincoln is decision to abide by whatever at Appomattox Courthouse, I'm making some stuff up here, was a poor decision for Reconstruction because of X, or it was great because of Y. And you're going to be telling your reader in a couple sentences, this is what this whole thing is about. This is why I'm telling this story. This person that I'm writing about is important because he led to the passage of X bill that affects all Americans, or this event led to the defeat of the Spanish in the Spanish-American War. This event led to whatever. So you're going to be telling why is this important. We just basically explained general overview here, but now you need to tell the reader this is worth learning. Okay, so you're selling your idea. Okay, what you're going to be telling people that they haven't been told before. Then I would go to, so we get this out of the way, and let's just imagine we're doing a 10-page paper. This is probably going to take the first 2 pages, something like that. Then you need to spend a little bit of time establishing historical context. So don't, again, it depends what format you're doing. If you're doing this in a book form, you can sort of interweave it in the narrative a little bit better. But if you're doing this for something short like a paper or a journal article, maybe you can assume your audience knows a little bit about the time period, but I think it's better to generally just give a little bit setting the stage for the events that are about to come. So if you're talking about battle during the Civil War, even though you're writing this for a Civil War journal, I basically summarize things up to the point of your battle, So Civil War starts for 1861. This happened. Then this battle happened. At this point, you had the Northern armies march here, Southern armies march here. And within a couple sentences, just very brief sentences, you can basically give readers everything they need to know in order to understand your story. So Again, if this is a book, might take a lot longer. If this is a 10-page paper, this might be a single paragraph. Bring readers up to speed. You can assume they know some knowledge, but even then, just bring them up to speed. Just give them enough to be able to understand the narrative. Then, for this narrative approach, I would just tell the story, okay? So if you're telling a story about a person, you're not going to be telling the parts of their life that aren't important. So and-so played rugby when they were 12 for 6 months and they quit because it was boring. Well, that doesn't mean anything. Obviously if it's a politician or something playing rugby, who cares? That's, unless it's something formative, unless they got a head injury or something that's going to prevent them from passing legislation they want to. There's no point to tell something that they just begin and quit. But if it's maybe, say, a football player and they play rugby, man, that might be important to their story because maybe gets interested in football and, it'll set the stage for what comes later. So give the reader what they need to understand the main point of your article. So if you're, again, talking about an event, and you say this event was important for, this court case was important for establishing this Supreme Court ruling or something like that, you don't need to tell the life story of all the lawyers. If you can just basically summarize everything leading up to the court case, okay? So give the readers a little bit of narrative, bring them up to date, historical context, a little bit of background on, again, if it's a figure, maybe tell the history of their early life fairly quickly. Then most of your narrative, and this is going to be, I'd argue, the big chunk of your paper and your book, is going to be simply telling the story. This is what happened to this person from ages 20 to 27. Things got crazy when they became a senator from state senator from 27 to 32. Then they had this crazy important period from 32 to 39, and you break those up into chapters and you tell their story for each of these time periods. Now, obviously, it's going to depend on who your audience is. If you're trying to speak to a more general audience, you're going to bring up the fun, more crazy stuff, maybe a little bit more during this narrative. But if you're just trying to write for a scholarly audience and you just want to get this person's important, maybe get to the important part of their history quicker. This hopefully will make up the bulk of everything you do, and you're sort of interweaving the important points along with the narrative. Then you bring the narrative to a conclusion. Not always, but a lot of times people have, if you're writing over a person, they're going to have an important part of their life, and then you've got the stuff that comes after, or maybe they die, and then this is what happens as a result of their actions. The event occurs. The event would be the main narrative. That's going to be most of the paper. But then you're going to sort of tell the reader what happens as a result of, again, a battle. This is what happens in the aftermath of the battle. This is what happens to these prisoners, stuff like that. So main part of your paper should be this narrative, but you got to summarize this narrative up. Then, I hate conclusions, but you need to tell the reader basically what you told them. And this is one of the things I've always heard about when talking about writing history papers is tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. So tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So for conclusions, I think the best thing to do is just basically almost repeat your thesis statement and your main argument again, obviously using different words, and just tell things again. Now, as you're writing this, you're going to be using footnotes throughout. MLA format, or let's go Chicago format is probably, I think, the one that's most preferred these days. But for all of these things, no matter what you're doing, blog article for scholarly journal, book, you're going to need to show your sources. So even if you're using footnotes, you need a bibliography. This is where you're going to put all the primary, secondary sources you used in this. So narrative approach, just tell the story from beginning to end as much as you possibly can. There's a different way of doing things, and this is going to be when a narrative doesn't necessarily work, when the story doesn't follow this A, B, C, D pattern enough to make sense, okay? And this is going to be for historical papers like how did 5 counties, let's go with this, Texas counties respond to the Great Depression, or what was life like in 5 Texas counties during the Great Depression? Well, you could hypothetically say, okay, this is what happened in this county in 1931. All right, this is what happened in this county in 1931. This is what happened in this county in 1931. And then you sort of just go back and forth. But that's confusing. It's hard for our brains to handle this, Okay, so I'm on this county again. Okay, now it's this year. Okay, now it's 1932. Now we're back to the first county. Sometimes it's better just to break it up, not using time as the main factor, but using, say, geography. So if in the case of the counties, instead of having this year, you have first story is this county, second story is this county, third story is this county, fourth story is this county, fifth story this county, and you break it up that way. So you don't have to use time as your main determiner here. So topical approach, I don't generally think the hook works as well. You could maybe find a narrative hook for the topical approach. I would just generally get into it. So like, give the reader a little bit overview of what they're going to be talking about. So again, if you're using a study of 5 suffragettes, women who are trying to get the vote for women in the early 1900s, maybe just say, all right, this is what general experience was. This is what people have written about this experience before. This is why what I'm going to be telling you is different. So these 5 women are examples of suffragettes who weren't afraid to use violence to achieve their ends, or 5 suffragettes who, whatever, or these are 5 counties in Texas that, basically explain what life was like in Texas during the Great Depression. So, general overview of the subject, tell them what you're going to tell them what people have told before, who have talked about this before. So maybe a paragraph or 2 on this, paragraph on that, why it's worth studying, your general thesis statement. So the study of these 5 counties shows that the experience in Texas during the Great Depression was not as traumatic as it was in other areas of the U.S. South, or the fact that the Texas had a prominent, I'm just making this up, a prominent cattle industry alleviated some of the hunger faced in other states. Whatever your study, whatever your research has led you to conclude. All right, and then again, along with that thesis statement, right? Same paragraph, maybe as the same as the thesis statement. This is what makes mine different. Okay. Then I would also do the general historical context. So if we're talking about, let's use those 5 counties as an example, set up the Great Depression. So stock market crash, people losing jobs, eventually reaches Texas, or suffragettes, general status of women in politics pre-early 1900s, the suffragette movement, the beginning of it. Here we got 1906 general time period. This is when these 5 women get involved. So establish historical context. Again, depending on if this is a book or a paper, whatever, is going to depend on how much time you spend on that. Then in this topical one, break it down a different way. So 5 people. So this is the case study of 5 women suffragettes. So this is suffragette 1, this is suffragette 2, suffragette 3, suffragette 4. Explain what they did, maybe how they're different than the other ones, different from general impressions of suffragettes, or counties. This is county 1. This is where it's located. This is what it experienced. This is how it's different from other counties. So you break it down that way. Then again, end with telling them what you just told them. Conclusion. So this is a topical approach. These 2 are the ones I would use most often. Okay. There's another approach. This is cyclopedia approach. So cyclopedias, they're just there to provide information. They're not there to, break any conventions. They're not there to excite readers. They're not for a general audience. They're just, here's the basic information. Same thing with Wikipedia. Wikipedia, encyclopedias, same thing. You can do this in a couple different ways. Generally, encyclopedias, a lot of times they'll do straight narratives. You don't need a hook. You don't need to tell them what came before. You just tell them, This is the story. This is the general lesson for the story. Start at the beginning, go to the end. If you're writing about a person, this person was born here. This is what they did early in life. This is what they did later in life. This is what they did at the end of life. Now, if you're doing it that, you're going to be maybe weaving the important parts of their life in there. They passed this bill that was later important to U.S. history, something like that. But you're just going straight beginning to an end. Other style of encyclopedia, I call this Wikipedia style. You just do a quick summary. So you tell them basically, this is this person. You break it down, where's the main part of your paper would be 500 sentences. You do a quick summary in 10 sentences before getting to the other 490 sentences. This is this person. This is the basics of what they did. This is what happened to them. Or this event, this is what happened. These are the people involved. Very quick summary. Then what you would do after doing this quick summary, and we're going to show an example of how to do this in a second here. You do a broad summary. This is when you basically say the same thing, you just bring it out in a lot of details. Again, it depends on who your audience is. Sometimes you'll see Wikipedias break it down even further. So you'll start with aspects of their personal life, things that maybe aren't important to what they did as far as history or events. Maybe that doesn't work for events, but for people, just basic. This is their religion, or this is something they like to do in their free time. Teddy Roosevelt, this president, he did jiu-jitsu and kickboxing and all that kind of stuff in his free time. Doesn't have anything to really do with the important parts of his life, but it's an interesting fact. If you're reading a Wikipedia article, they're just going to stick that right there at the beginning because it's not that important with the rest of his life events. And then, if you're doing this Wikipedia style, you're going to be getting into the important life events in the main part of your text. And then sometimes you'll see Wikipedia just basically summarizing why this person is important. So you see this done in these other approaches at the beginning and then again at the end. Sometimes in these encyclopedias, Wikipedia, just wait until the very end. So this is what this person did. Hey guys, this is why this person's important. And you'll sometimes see in this version this controversial stuff stuck down at the bottom. So each of these different approaches, again, these are three that you can intermix them, but I generally think following one or the other is the best way to do it. I'm just going to pull up a couple examples of how to do these things. So it would be an example of this narrative approach. Now this is just a article for a general audience. Smithsonian Mag, I think they're great. I think they do their research, but it's for entertainment purposes. It's not written for a scholarly audience. It's not something that's peer reviewed. But the format they're using, I think you could use in a peer reviewed format. So what this story is basically fun story about in 1978, the Soviet scientists went out into Siberia. They found this family of 6 that had been living out there for 40 years. Didn't know that World War II occurred. They basically had just gone out there on their own. The way they start with the story is main stories about this family, but they start about these scientists are going out there, all the crazy stuff they're starting to see, and then holy crap, there's this family out here. We haven't seen humans in Siberia for weeks, but we come upon this family out here in the middle of nowhere. And so that's bringing the reader in, like, wow, this crazy event where they're expecting to find oil or mineral deposits. Instead, they find human beings, and then they learn these human beings didn't know anything, hadn't had contact with other humans for 40 years. So that's setting up, man, that gets the reader involved. Then what it does is it's going to, so it does that basically in these first couple paragraphs. So this is probably, if you brought this out to a book form, it'd be the first 5 pages. Maybe 40 page, let's say not book, but this probably be 40 pages of documents. First 5 spent bringing them up to speed with this interesting story about these scientists. Then it resets into the narrative, basically goes back to the beginning, says how the family got there. In this instance, I think the guy was fleeing from Bolsheviks or something like that. Gets out there, tells about how they survived, how they raised their kids, things like that. And then you're seeing the vast majority of this is going to be written about that. Then, you have the end of the narrative. Now, this being written for a scholarly audience isn't going to have the the historiography, and it's not going to be hammering home the thesis of it as much. But this is a good example of a narrative format. Again, this is what you're going to find most historical documents would be something like that. So that would be an example of the narrative format. This would be an example of a topical format. So this is about the scientist Alexander von Humboldt, who is basically this guy who's explored all the Americas, came up with all these scientific theories, put down a lot of data, wrote extensively on scientific matters, math, history, that kind of thing. You could hypothetically write, this is Humboldt, early life, middle life, later life, and you could use a narrative format. But what they're doing is instead they're basically saying, all right, this guy did so much stuff, we're just going to focus on the stuff that's important. So what they basically did is, all right, this is Humboldt, how he contributed to mineralogy, and they basically do a chapter on, a little section on, his scientific observations on volcanoes, things like that. Then it does something on his party life or whatever, but general scientific theories. Then it does his observations on, heck, I don't know, what maps that he created. So you got maps, you have mineralogy, you have scientific observations, Enlightenment thought, okay, general theories about the New World. So it's basically saying this, and this. Some of the ideas may have come about before others, some after others, but they're just focusing on it topically. They're not doing a narrative format. This is what Jefferson thought about Humboldt. So we're spending a paragraph on Jefferson's relationship with Humboldt, even though it might have happened afterwards. Humboldt's thoughts on slavery, again, things like that. So it's topical, not just narrative, or not narrative at all, actually, because some of the stuff happened before and after the other stuff. So that would be one way you could do it. Another way, again, is this encyclopedia way. This is just so this is from the Handbook of Texas. This is a site I use all the time. It's fine to use as a secondary source. They cite all those sources. You can come down here and find a general bibliography of everything they've done. But what they do, for the most part, is they do this. This is what happened first. This is what happened second. They don't tell you why the person's important. This is just, here's the information. Here's the order this information happened. Here's the end. So this is a straight up narrative encyclopedia format. If you're writing for an encyclopedia, this would be a decent way to do things. Just straight, this happened, this happened, this happened. This would be that Wikipedia format I talked about. So if you're writing for Wikipedia, you basically have the beginning summary of, this happened. This is a general overview of this person. So this would be Hernan Cortez, this guy that defeated the Aztecs, the Spanish conquistador. So for somebody who's doing a quick search on him, they just read the first couple paragraphs. They have an overview of his life. Then what they're going to do is they're basically going to break things down into more detail. So this is for the people that need to learn more. They spend a lot of the next pages in a narrative format, and then they're going to sort of conclude after his death with the interpretations of him. So this is why he's important. This is the controversy surrounding him. So it's not exactly the same, because you got the brief summary at the beginning, the broader summary, and then why they're important at the end. So any of those are, you can do any of those that way. And again, you can do it different ways. These are just the ones that I found are most effective and the easiest to understand. So good luck. Again, put your research together and put it out in a format that fits your audience and that is understandable to whoever you're writing it for.